February 1942. The Caribbean Sea. The largest submarine on Earth was somewhere in these waters. 130 men, a crew of experienced sailors on a vessel so large and so heavily armed that nothing else like it existed anywhere in the world. They had a destination. They had orders. They had a route. They never arrived. No distress signal. No final transmission. No survivors. The official investigation concluded: accidental collision. Cause of loss established. Case closed. But here is what the official conclusion does not explain. The ship that reportedly struck and sank Surcouf, the American cargo vessel Thompson Lykes, could not confirm what it had hit. The crew felt an impact in the dark. Something went under. They couldn't say what. And the wreck has never been found. A 110-meter submarine, nearly 3,000 tons of steel, over 100 men, somewhere in the Caribbean. More than 80 years later, no one has located it. The official case is closed. The physical evidence that should have closed it is still missing. Think about that for a moment. Not as an abstraction, as a fact. The largest submarine in the world vanished without leaving a confirmed trace, and the investigation that followed accepted that silence as an answer. This is the story of the Surcouf, and the question that has never been properly resolved. To understand why this disappearance doesn't sit right, you first need to understand what the Surcouf actually was. Because she wasn't built to do what submarines do. She was built to do something that had never been done before. Launched in 1929, she was 110 meters long, longer than a football pitch, 3,000 tons on the surface, a crew of over 100 men. No other submarine in the world came close to her size. But her size was not her most unusual feature. On her forward deck, sealed inside a watertight steel hangar, she carried two 8-inch naval guns. The kind of armament found on heavy cruisers, warships, not submarines. No submarine before or since has carried weapons of that caliber as standard equipment. She also carried a small reconnaissance aircraft, stored in a pressurized cylinder built into her hull. Launch it, scout, land alongside, recover it, dive. And she had a brig, a purpose-built prisoner compartment, inside a submarine. Not a storage locker, not a repurposed space, a dedicated cell designed to hold captured crew from vessels she destroyed on the surface. This was a vessel built to operate entirely alone. No support ships, no port access for months. Sail out, hunt, destroy or capture, disappear beneath the surface. In theory, she was formidable. In practice, and this will matter, she was one of the most difficult vessels in any navy to keep operational. Her systems demanded constant maintenance. Her size made her dangerously slow to dive in an emergency. By 1939, the doctrine she had been designed for had already been overtaken by the war. Surcouf was a marvel that the world had moved past before the fighting even started, which makes the question sharper. Why, in February 1942, with a war 2 years old, with better vessels available, was this particular submarine being sent on a long solo transit across the Caribbean and into the Pacific? What exactly was she supposed to be doing out there? The answer, it turns out, is complicated. When France fell in June 1940, Surcouf was in the British port of Portsmouth. Her officers had hours to decide which side of a fractured country they were on. The British didn't wait for them to finish deciding. On July 3, 1940, British forces moved on French warships in multiple ports simultaneously. Orders to seize the fleet before Germany could claim it. In Portsmouth, the operation to take Surcouf turned violent. French and British sailors fought. Shots were fired. Men were killed on both sides. Surcouf's own first lieutenant was shot dead by British forces. She was taken. The surviving crew was given a choice: join de Gaulle's Free French or go home. Most stayed. But consider what that means. The men who remained aboard Surcouf had just watched their ship seized at gunpoint by the country they were now expected to fight alongside. They had lost their first lieutenant in that seizure. They were now operating under British command, in a vessel they couldn't maintain properly, running missions they hadn't chosen. The alliance functioned. It was never anything more than functional. And then Surcouf made it worse. In December 1941, days after Pearl Harbor, while Washington was still absorbing the shock of the attack, Surcouf participated in the unauthorized seizure of Saint-Pierre and Miquelon, two small French islands off the coast of Canada. The Americans had their own diplomatic arrangements with Vichy France. They were furious. The British were embarrassed. It became a genuine international incident at the worst possible moment. Within weeks, Surcouf received orders to leave the Atlantic entirely. Official reason: reinforce Free French naval forces in the Pacific. That is the stated reason. The timing, immediately after a diplomatic crisis involving the most important new ally of the war, has not been lost on historians. She had caused friction with the British. She had infuriated the Americans. She was difficult to operate and politically inconvenient. Was this a genuine military deployment? Or was Surcouf being moved somewhere? She couldn't cause any more trouble. She departed Bermuda on February 12, 1942. 6 days later, she ceased to exist. 6 days of silence. From the moment Surcouf left Bermuda until the moment she was lost, there is no documented radio contact. No confirmed sighting by another vessel. No record of her position. For 6 days, the largest submarine in the world was simply moving through busy, well-patrolled waters and leaving no trace. That absence, on its own, is strange. Then, on the night of February 18th, the American cargo vessel Thompson Lykes reported a collision. Her crew had felt an impact in the darkness. Something had struck the hull. The object went under. It sank quickly. They could not identify what it was. It was night. Visibility was poor. No survivors were seen. No rescue attempt was made. The Thompson Lykes continued on her course and filed a report with American authorities. When Surcouf failed to arrive at her destination, the report was reviewed. The timing was consistent. The location matched her projected route. The French Naval Command, after investigation, accepted the conclusion. Surcouf had been struck by the Thompson Lykes in the dark. She had sunk. Accidental collision. Loss by misadventure. Case closed. Now hold that conclusion against the physical reality. The Thompson Lykes could not confirm she had struck a submarine. She could not confirm the size, the nationality, or the identity of the object. Her crew reported striking something. That something sank. And then, nothing. No fuel slick. No debris field. No bodies recovered in the days that followed. No equipment. No trace of a vessel carrying over 100 men on a long ocean transit. Fuel stores, personal effects, everything that floats when a ship goes down. A 110-meter submarine. Nearly 3,000 tons of displacement. More than 100 men. And the sea gave back nothing. The official record accepted that. Drew a line under it. Moved on. There is a version of events where that is exactly what happened. A collision in the dark. A rapid sinking. Everything going straight to the bottom. It is possible. It is not impossible. But there is another version. Several, in fact. And each of them raises its own uncomfortable questions. Start with the official account, because it deserves its hearing. Accidental collisions between surface vessels and submarines happened throughout the war. A submarine running on the surface at night is difficult to see. Low profile, no lights, no radar signature that would distinguish her from debris or a wave pattern. The Caribbean in February 1942 was operationally dense. German U-boats were actively sinking Allied ships in those waters. Traffic was heavy. A cargo ship striking an unlit submarine in darkness, the submarine flooding and sinking, before any message could be sent. This is plausible. It fits the available evidence. The problem is not that the theory is implausible. The problem is that it cannot be confirmed. The second theory follows directly from the operational environment. In February 1942, Allied air and naval patrols in the Caribbean were hunting submarines. Any unidentified vessel on the surface at night, in a busy shipping lane, was a potential target. Surcouf was unlike anything else in the water. Her profile matched no standard Allied or Axis silhouette. She was large and unusual and slow to dive. Some researchers have raised questions about whether American and British patrols in the region were fully briefed on her route and schedule. In a chaotic operational environment, in the dark, in waters where German submarines were a daily threat, an identification error was not impossible. This theory has never been confirmed. It has also never been formally closed off. The third possibility is internal catastrophe. Surcouf's systems were aged and poorly maintained. A catastrophic mechanical failure, an explosion in the engine room, an uncontrolled flooding event, a systems failure that cascaded faster than the crew could respond, could have sunk her in minutes, silently, with no external vessel involved at all. If she went down suddenly and intact, the debris field would be deep and concentrated, not visible on the surface. That would explain the silence. It would also explain the absence of wreckage. A fourth theory has circulated in published accounts, that Surcouf's accumulated political inconvenience had made her a liability and that her loss was not accidental. This is noted here only because it exists in the record. It is not supported by credible evidence. What unites the first three theories is more important than what separates them. None can be confirmed. None can be ruled out. Because the one thing that would settle the question, the wreck, has not been found. And here is what makes that absence genuinely difficult to accept. This was not a small vessel lost in a remote location in an era before maritime surveillance. This was the largest submarine in the world, lost in heavily trafficked waters in 1942 during a war in which both Allied and Axis forces were actively monitoring those sea lanes. And nobody found anything. Strip everything back to the confirmed record. Surcouf departed Bermuda on February 12, 1942. She was ordered to the Pacific via the Panama Canal. She never arrived anywhere. The Thompson Lykes reported a collision with an unidentified object on the night of February 18th. The object sank. The crew could not confirm what it was. No other vessel reported sinking in those waters during that period. The French Naval Command accepted the collision as the most probable explanation for the loss. That is what the record confirms. Here is what the record does not confirm. It does not confirm that the object struck by the Thompson Lykes was Surcouf. It does not confirm that any wreckage, debris, or physical evidence was recovered from the collision site. It does not contain any radio transmission from Surcouf at any point between departure and loss. It does not contain a confirmed wreck location. Candidate sites have been proposed in the Caribbean over the decades. As of now, none has been formally verified by French or international maritime authorities. Read that list again slowly. No positive identification, no physical evidence, no communications, no confirmed wreck. The case was closed on the basis of a collision report from a crew that did not know what they had hit, in an area where the wreck has never been located. That is not a solved case. That is a case with a plausible explanation and no physical proof. There is a particular category of historical disappearance that is more troubling than an ordinary loss. Not the ship that sinks with witnesses, not the wreck that is found years later and finally explained. The other kind, the vessel that simply stops transmitting, that fails to arrive, that leaves a silence where answers should be. The case that closes not because the evidence is complete, but because there is no more evidence to look for. Surcouf belongs to that category. She was not a minor vessel with a minor crew. She was the largest submarine in the world. Her men had already been through the fracture of their country, the seizure of their ship, the killing of their first lieutenant. They had chosen a side in a war that was going badly. They were sailing toward a new ocean on orders that may have had as much to do with politics as with strategy. And they vanished in one of the most heavily monitored maritime environments in the world, in an era of radio, of naval coordination, of active air patrol. The physical record of what happened to them fills a paragraph. The official explanation may be correct. There is no compelling reason to dismiss it. But a correct explanation and a confirmed explanation are not the same thing. And for the families of more than 100 men, and for every researcher who has worked this case across 8 decades, that distinction has never stopped mattering. The Surcouf is on the seafloor somewhere. A 110-meter submarine does not dissolve. Modern survey technology has located vessels smaller than her, older than her, in more difficult conditions. The Caribbean's floor has been mapped. More of it is being mapped. When the wreck is found, and the probability is that it will be eventually, the physical evidence may answer what the paper record cannot. Until then, one fact remains. The largest submarine in the world disappeared without leaving a confirmed trace. A case was built around a collision report from a crew who didn't know what they'd hit. The investigation accepted that, closed the file, and the wreck is still out there, waiting to tell a different story, or the same one. We don't know which,